Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that last panel. I'd now like to introduce you to our next speaker, Bruce Linton. He's founder and former chairman of Canopy Growth Corp. Throughout his career, Bruce has been responsible for the acquisition and disposition of nearly $4 billion in business assets. He is also an investor and board member with the New Holland Agriculture and MindMed. And I would also like to add that Bruce is leading the way, dividing $10,000 amongst all 5 of the institutions we are supporting here at PsyTech over this summit. So thank you for that, Bruce. And I will leave it in your capable hands.
Thank you. So I think it was February, I get a call from Saul. And Saul says, we're going to have an event, PsyTech, and it's going to attract really notable speakers. We're going to be science-driven, public policy oriented, and there needs to be a little bit of talk capital. Would you come to Israel? I'm like, well, I'd come to Israel even if you weren't having an event. So I said I was in. And with all the things that changed, I got to say props to Saul and Deb and the people who put this on, because probably most often what people would say is, well, we can't have the event, so let's have maybe 1 or 2 hours of programming, and that should be great. And instead, you guys went right into the deep end. And so I definitely appreciate that. I think the feedback I had from yesterday's and today's has been very great. The prior speaker talked about disclosing bias. I have all kinds of bias against all kinds of things, but I also am an investor in MindMed and an investor in Red Light Holland. But it's odd that I'm speaking about investing, because here's my approach to investing, and I think it actually does make a ton of sense for psychedelics, but it's not necessarily anywhere you might go to a business school and learn. So I would say I'm not an investor. What I do is I buy part-time jobs. And the way that I make my decision on which part-time jobs I will acquire is first I decide, do I want to buy a job that involves debt or equity? Because am I interested in being an investor or a loan to them? And that really determines, do I like where the capital markets are? So I really, right now, given where we are with effectively 0 interest rates, I'm happy to do either. So whether I'm a party lending secured debt or a party who's in the situation where I'm an investor, but my investment comes with strings, and my strings is that I want to be involved. I don't want to run anything, but and I don't really love board meetings. What I really want to do is have weekly calls to talk about what are we working on, and I'll describe what we drive through. So the way I ask questions about what we're working on, and therefore where I buy my part-time jobs, is first I like to have like a grid, a column where across the top, the leaders, the scientists, the lawyers, the whomever, have listed all of the, I'll call it active ingredients they're willing to work with. And then down the left-hand side, they list every indication that they think they may have efficacy against. And then what you try to get is, really, where do you want to allocate your capital and your time in order to get the data set to win the argument? So where are your small bets going to be? Where are your big bets going to be? What do we have as an advantage in identifying those circumstances? And when you work the grid, you start to then get to the bottom and say, if we're going to use ingredient X against indication Y, what are the incumbent current best practices? How bad are they? How good are they? How big is this segment? How much do other people currently generate in revenues from the resolution? Or I thought it was a great line by the one prior speaker who said, I wrote it down, no drug is a good drug unless you have to keep taking it according to US practices. That's a great model for disrupting those parties. So I want to see, as we get to the bottom, what's the size of the segment? Whose piece of pie do we have to take? And how disruptive it is to that party, because they may then become very interested in licensing in or acquiring if what we're doing is taking their drug model, which is you got to keep taking it forever, and extinguishing it by a more curative approach. And so when you take that grid, all of a sudden you start to then overlay some timelines, and you start to say, when will you be able to, oh, there you go, home video. When will you be able to see results? And where's the data coming from? And so part of my questions I ask when I'm looking at investing is, in which jurisdiction can we legally do the work? And can we use that data set when we conduct it in a way to win an argument in another jurisdiction? So an example, in Canada, and I recognize cannabis and psychedelics aren't the same and everybody likes to divide, but when you have really bad rules governing a space, what you have in common is really bad rules. And the question is, how do you use data to win arguments against bad rules? So in Canada, there was no politician that actually wanted to allow people to have access to cannabinoids in 2001. They just didn't want it. But what happened is we have a Charter of Human Rights, which simply says, summarized, that if there's a medical benefit of an ingredient, you can't withhold it from a Canadian. So you need to be able to show that there's a medical benefit. How do you do that? Data. And so when they pushed those buttons in 2001, the result was a cannabinoid opportunity, and it evolved to what it is. I think those sorts of jurisdictional windows, I recognize so many people are very excited about, when do we get to be under FDA in the US? When do we get to be in the EU? But I'm willing to sort of invest in, buy my part-time job at, companies that are willing to work from the edge to the middle so that they can actually show where they've made progress and they can start to have even greater data. So when I work through all of that, I would say that what my investment thesis is, do the parties involved wish to win an argument? Are they willing to invest in the data and the process to do it? And do they have a big enough piece of a pie that they can disrupt by, in fact, interrupting someone else's business model? And when I roll that back up to the top, I continue to find that the difference between this sector and many is that you probably, if you're willing to write one check, should be willing to write at least three. And each of them should be about the same size. Simply meaning that I'm finding there's so much promotional discussion about the rate at which this is going to transform, which I don't align with. I think it's actually not going to be such an overnight success, but it's going to be a very disruptive outcome, which means you need to prepare yourself to write 3 investment checks, not 1. Many of the investors who are putting in these things now are looking for, instant rate of return, and they're being told by, the street, which means the investment banks, that this is the next trade, this is the next play. And I really don't like when people describe things as a trade or a play. I think what it is it's the next opportunity for disruption. And I'm just noticing with my screen, people may have noticed I have not really had much of a haircut, and facial hair is happening. And to add to the ability to cause social distancing, I managed to chip my front tooth, which I can assure you, if I happen to go somewhere, I always wear a mask, but if I wasn't and I smile with a chipped tooth, long unruly hair, and a scruffy beard, I think it's almost 100% sure that I will achieve social distancing with that particular look. So I don't know if there's some questions feeding in, but I do think that you do need to see 3 before you make an investment. And there are, today, I've had 2 companies contact me because they are going to change the world. And I love the optimism, but I do need to see, actually a little bit more. And I do think that if there was one thing that appears to be getting slightly overweighted, I would say it is the whole notion around psilocybin. I believe in psilocybin. I actually see where it can go. I met with George before it was called Compass. Amanda and Cosmo Fielding are people that I would call my friends. They're people that I think have done great and genuine work, but psilocybin as a commercial investment continues to strike me as one which is, there is potential, but the method by which they're going to commercialize it could end up going quite offside about, MAPS and other people who may want to push that. Question on the side, what made me like MindMed? Well, first it was the fact that JR, who I spoke to several times, as a principal, was intellectually fully committed. He understood really where this could go and why he wanted to see it there. So it was coming from the core and the heart. But he was also open to concepts. I said, I see a lot of biotech companies that they bet on one answer and they have to. And the effect is, if they're right, it's great. If they're wrong, which they often are, it's quite devastating for everyone. I would sooner see a platform company created which has common functionality, whether it's dealing with as mundane things as finance to regulatory affairs to clinical practices to supply chain management, but that the platform's purpose is to be able to onboard the best intellectual advancing leadership thought processes de-risk for researchers, them being on a boat by themselves, join the platform, see the leverage from the platform, because if some or all of the undertakings are correct, you have a certainty of return, and the probability of all of them being incorrect is extraordinarily low. And so the evolution of MindMed has to be increasingly become a platform company, which is building those capabilities, which is why we continue to need and do raise more capital. But I think the effect will be that it attracts people who want to succeed on a de-risked basis. And this space is certain to be disruptive, but it's not certain that everyone's going to be successful. And so I do think a platform approach, in fact, can be quite a disruptive approach to the traditional method of forming a company in what I would call generally the biotech science research space. Another thing that somebody texted me before, jurisdictionally, which countries do I like the most? Well, right now, I would say anywhere that we can actually get things done. And so if there's not a strategy to have some activities that involve Switzerland, or a strategy to have some activities that can get research done in other geographies like even Canada or Australia, I want to see them using the data they get from those jurisdictions to change the rules in the jurisdictions they may ultimately wish to be in. Because I don't want to be investing in a business that says, please stand here while we wait for politicians and bureaucrats to change a model so you can act. I am not good with that approach. And so I do think, I listened to a session, again, it was about cannabinoids, where Harvard and MIT, it's 2 Fridays ago, you can hear it at their alumni group, they were talking about the research undertakings that were funded with $9 million US of philanthropic grants given to them. And one of the biggest challenges they had was that some of the inputs they wanted for their experiments were of such poor nature and coming from Mississippi State, they couldn't rely on getting a regular supply, couldn't get consistency. And so they said the research was obstructed by the available inputs of cannabinoids. And I thought, wouldn't it be easier to design what you want to do and move it directly to a jurisdiction which has that supply chain so you can get the results and bring it back, a la Canada, perhaps Australia, to some extent Germany. And so I like that sort of, I'll call it flexible thinking on get to the answer, not complain about the environment in which we work. And that's not always the case. I do like to see a scientific staff. I thought the presenters before were terrific, and the notion that this is taking old practices to get better answers. And I really do, I do find the chops in the psychedelic space far, far better. I was talking to Deborah before, and I was in the green room before this. I said, what I really found the best surprise, which has not been a huge surprise in the psychedelic space, is the duration and quality of work done academically relative to that which we could draw on for cannabinoids. And so I do think it has the capacity to actually more accelerate if the cash comes in. I'm a bit worried right now. There are at least 4 companies seeking financing to go public as soon as they can, and they're going to be very active in promoting their stock. But really what they've done is they're trying to say, we're just like these other companies. And I prefer companies that say, this is what we're doing, not we're just like someone else. So I'm just going to pick invite. There's a session on somebody can't find me on Wova. I apologize for that. And I think I'm looking forward to Dr. Johnson talking about what he's got going on at Johns Hopkins. There's a nice cross connect there. Tom, I think I just covered off what I mean by platform. It's common applications, so you decrease the risk of spending capital on things that are common, finance, whether it can be regulatory affairs, legal listing, capital raising. And that once you have the platform, the whole point is to be an attractant to other researchers who want to de-risk their route. Because everybody could say, can go off and say, well, I'm going to start my own business. And I'm not sure that this space will support the number of sponsored potential startups. And therefore, I think it's actually going to be quite a bit helpful for people, and I recognize my bias, but it's going to be quite a bit helpful for people to say, what's my probability of success now versus had I done this idea of going on my own 6 months ago, or should I get on a platform company like a MindMed? Yeah, there's a lot of psychedelic companies sprouting up in Canada. To be quite frank, for people in other jurisdictions, it's because in Canada we have probably some of the worst regulatory structures for governing public companies. Each of our province or states has their own regulator, or they join with a neighboring province, and then they govern what you can do. And then we have 3 exchanges that will determine who can be on them. And so the reason any US-based marijuana operating company touching the plant THC is listed in Canada is because they can't legally list in the US, but they can legally list in Canada. And it's a function of a bunch of things, none of which I think represent really the best in governance. But what it does give is access to capital to companies that couldn't access it in their own jurisdiction, which again, with psychedelics is going to be a big deal for some people in some jurisdictions, and it will be a non-issue whether you want to be on the CSE, the NEO, the TSX, all of them I think are completely open to it. And so it's really a regulatory, I won't call it failing, but it is a regulatory bit of a shortcoming in the way that if you can't do it somewhere else, you can probably list in Canada. I would say that that if you buy stock as a private company, typically if you're an insider helping to do a number of the things that you would do in a part-time job, maybe your stock will be locked up. So the urgency to be public should be considered very small. Question, can it be bought, THC farm? There's questions about canopy and R&D. I would say that probably one of the worst things that's happening out of COVID across the planet that I'm seeing is that when people don't know when markets are opening again, when things are transiting again, when it gets normal, whatever that was, is they do what I think Frank Zappa would have written a song says, sold R&D, having a great quarter. And it's not just one company. I'm seeing that, frankly, the reality is that much of the scientific pursuit has no future known application in this instant. So they're selling R&D across the world, and that will help them in their current quarter. And so that's regrettably what I'm seeing. Any thoughts on applications there? AI, I think there's going to be actually, I've been looking at, there was a robust investment opportunity and a number of product coming through in the cannabinoid delivery space that had some level of either approval or IP around them. I think that the mechanisms of dosage control and certainty and getting efficacy in terms of having something regulated as a medical device is going to be a very positive and good thing. And I haven't had many offerings brought that way. Registering something like that in Germany or Canada and having it approved means that it's an insurably covered product. So, people might say, well, why would somebody buy Storz & Bickel as a volcano maker? Well, it's a medical device, which means that many of the people who need it are going to actually get it covered by insurance. And so I think there's going to be quite a lot of, there should be a scramble around what can we do as a delivery mechanism to be sure that, in fact, micro is micro, et cetera, and turn that into brand IP, turn the combination of ingredients and delivery mechanism certification by an authority like Health Canada or German equivalents, and that becomes an interesting package. Oh, and apparently I'm supposed to download Wova that. I'm not feeling like I'm going to download an app during this. So I think I have about one more minute. The final part where I am is people ask, I don't know why they always want to ask a baseball analogy. They want to say, what inning is the psychedelic space in? And I guess it kind of goes back not differently to how I had to answer it in cannabis. What are you talking about? Are you talking about medical research to confirm efficacy based against a dosage? Or are you talking about how you can speed roll a joint on an animated process? And so when I look at this spot, I think where we are as far as what inning, by country, most games have not been started. They've been banned because they hate the topic. By certain more progressive geographies, I would say that we're at best in the first inning. And I say that in that I think that the data has yet to be read on anything that has been funded under this new wave of support. And when it is, the first data being read out is going to be the end of the first inning, and it's going to be on to a very much bigger game. And I think I'm going to wrap it up there because it's 20 minutes and 5 seconds. Thank you.